Part 1. Cracks in the Foundation. Chapter 1. The Argument. Charlotte and Bob lived in a quaint suburban home, a picture-perfect setting that belied the growing tension in their marriage. Bob, a financial analyst, often brought work stress home, while Charlotte, who managed a small but thriving bookstore, found herself increasingly frustrated by Bob's emotional distance. Their once vibrant conversations had dwindled into routine exchanges, and Charlotte missed the intimacy they once shared. "Bob, can you please help me with dinner tonight?" Charlotte asked one evening, her voice tinged with weariness. "Not tonight, Charlotte. I have a ton of work to finish," Bob replied, without looking up from his laptop. Charlotte sighed, her frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "You always have work to do. It feels like we never spend any time together anymore." Bob glanced up, irritation flickering in his eyes. "I'm doing this for us, Charlotte. My job is demanding, and it pays for this house, for everything." "But what about us, Bob? What about our relationship?" Charlotte's voice was rising, the years of unspoken grievances surfacing all at once. Bob snapped his laptop shut. "What do you want me to do, Charlotte? Quit my job? How do you think we'll manage then?" "This isn't just about your job. It's about the fact that you're never present. Even when you're here, you're not really here," Charlotte said, her voice breaking. "Well, maybe if you appreciated what I do a bit more, we wouldn't be having this argument," Bob shouted back. The argument escalated, each of them hurling accusations and grievances that had built up over the years. The cozy living room, with its warm tones and carefully curated decor, suddenly felt cold and hostile. Finally, in a moment of frustration and hurt, they decided to take a break. Bob packed a bag and headed to his friend Jake's place, leaving Charlotte alone in the silence of their home. The door closed behind him, with a finality that echoed through the empty house. Charlotte stood in the middle of their living room, tears streaming down her face. She felt a profound sense of loss and confusion. How had they come to this point? What had happened to the love and connection they once shared? She spent the night tossing and turning, replaying the argument in her mind. She knew they both had valid points, but the way they had communicated them had only driven a deeper wedge between them. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Charlotte resolved to use this time apart to reflect on their relationship and figure out a way to make things right. Chapter 2. Temporary Separation. In the aftermath of the fight, Charlotte and Bob decided to take a break from each other. The argument had taken a toll, and they both needed space to process their feelings. Bob hastily packed a bag, stuffing it with clothes and toiletries. He grabbed his laptop and some work files, trying to keep a semblance of normalcy despite the turmoil. With a final tense glance at Charlotte, he walked out the door and headed to his friend Jake's place. Charlotte stood at the window, watching Bob's car disappear down the street. The quiet house felt suddenly immense and empty. She wandered from room to room, each one filled with memories of happier times that now felt like they belonged to someone else. The cozy living room where they had spent countless evenings together, the kitchen where they had cooked meals side by side, even their bedroom. All of it seemed tainted by the recent strife. The silence was deafening. Without Bob's presence, the house felt like a hollow shell. Charlotte spent her days in a fog, going through the motions at her bookstore, but unable to shake the gnawing sadness and confusion. At night, she lay awake for hours, replaying their argument in her mind. She questioned where things had gone wrong, when their loving partnership had started to unravel. Charlotte tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Bob. She missed him, missed their conversations, even missed their small daily routines. She picked up her phone several times to call him, but always put it down again, unsure of what to say. The distance between them felt insurmountable, and she was scared that they might never bridge the gap. Meanwhile, Bob was struggling with his own demons. Staying at Jake's place offered some distraction, but it didn't take away the pain. He felt like a failure, both as a husband and as a person. To cope, he turned to alcohol, seeking solace at the bottom of a bottle. The first few drinks numbed the pain, but as the nights wore on, he drank more heavily, trying to drown out the guilt and regret that haunted him. One night, after too many drinks, Bob found himself in a dimly lit bar. The alcohol blurred his judgment, and he struck up a conversation with a woman at the bar. She was attractive, and in his inebriated state, he welcomed the distraction from his troubled thoughts. One thing led to another, and they ended up in her apartment. Bob barely registered what was happening. He was lost in a haze of alcohol and despair. The next morning, as the harsh light of day streamed through the window, Bob woke up with a pounding headache and a sinking feeling in his stomach. He looked around the unfamiliar room and saw the woman from the bar sleeping beside him. The events of the previous night came rushing back, and he felt a wave of shame and self-loathing. How could he have let this happen? What had he done? Bob quietly dressed and left the apartment, his mind racing. The gravity of his mistake hit him hard. He had betrayed Charlotte, the woman he loved, the woman he had promised to be faithful to. He felt sick to his core, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. As he drove back to Jake's place, he made a vow to himself. He would bury this incident deep and never speak of it. He couldn't bear the thought of hurting Charlotte even more. He would do whatever it took to repair their marriage, to make things right again, without the shadow of his infidelity looming over them. Back at Jake's, Bob tried to pull himself together. He avoided alcohol, knowing it had led him down a dark path. He threw himself into his work, trying to keep busy and distract himself from the guilt gnawing at him. He called Charlotte. Their conversations stilted, but civil. They talked about mundane things, how her bookstore was doing, what was happening at his job. But the underlying tension was always there. Charlotte sensed something was off, but couldn't put her finger on it. Bob seemed distant, preoccupied. She wondered if he was having second thoughts about their relationship, if maybe he had found someone else. The uncertainty ate at her, but she didn't dare ask. She wasn't sure she could handle the truth. As the days turned into weeks, both Charlotte and Bob struggled with their own battles. Charlotte fought against the loneliness and the nagging doubts, while Bob grappled with his guilt and the fear that he had irrevocably damaged their relationship. They were two people adrift, each yearning for a connection, but unsure of how to reach out. Despite the turmoil, there was a glimmer of hope. They still loved each other, and that love, though bruised and battered, was still there. It was this love that kept them going, that made them want to find a way back to each other. But the road ahead was uncertain, and neither knew if they could truly mend the cracks in their foundation. Part 2. Rebuilding and Confession. Chapter 3. Reconciliation. After a week apart, Bob returned home, his heart heavy with regret, but filled with determination to make amends. He stood at the doorstep of their quaint suburban house, the place that had once been their sanctuary. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the quiet evening. Charlotte opened the door, her eyes reflecting a mix of relief and apprehension. She had spent the past week in deep reflection, trying to understand where their relationship had gone wrong and how they could fix it. Seeing Bob standing there, looking weary and remorseful, brought a rush of emotions. Without a word, she stepped aside to let him in. They sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken words. Bob finally broke the silence, his voice trembling. "Charlotte, I'm so sorry for everything. I know I've been distant and haven't been the partner you deserve. I want to make things right." Charlotte nodded, her own voice shaky. "I've been thinking a lot too. We've both made mistakes, but I believe we can fix this if we really try." Over the next few days, they had long, heartfelt conversations. They talked about their feelings, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Bob shared the pressures he felt at work and how it affected his mood and behavior at home. Charlotte opened up about her feelings of neglect and her longing for the intimacy they once shared. These conversations were not easy. There were tears and moments of anger, but there was also a sense of relief as they began to understand each other better. They made a pact to communicate more openly and to prioritize their relationship. To rekindle their connection, they started going on dates again. They visited their favorite restaurants, took long walks in the park, and even tried new activities together, like cooking classes and hiking trips. These moments brought them closer, reminding them of the love and joy that had initially brought them together. For a while, things seemed to improve. The laughter returned to their home, and the intimacy they both craved began to blossom once more. Bob made a concerted effort to be more present, to leave work at the office and to focus on Charlotte when he was home. He would surprise her with small gifts, plan romantic evenings, and listen attentively when she spoke. Despite these efforts, Bob's guilt remained a silent burden. The memory of his infidelity gnawed at him, a constant reminder of his betrayal. He tried to overcompensate by being overly attentive and overly accommodating, but the weight of his secret affected his behavior in subtle ways. He found himself avoiding eye contact at times, his smiles a bit forced, his affection tinged with an underlying anxiety. Charlotte, ever perceptive, sensed that something was off. Bob's actions, while loving, often seemed strained, as if he was trying too hard. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling her. This nagging suspicion grew over time, fueling her anxiety. She noticed the way Bob would sometimes stare off into the distance, a troubled look on his face, or how he would wake up in the middle of the night, restless and uneasy. These moments chipped away at the fragile peace they had built. Charlotte tried to dismiss her doubts, convincing herself that she was being paranoid, but the unease persisted. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, watching a movie, Charlotte decided to confront her feelings. She paused the movie and turned to Bob, her eyes searching his face. "Bob, is there something you're not telling me? I feel like there's a wall between us, and I don't know why." Bob's heart raced, the moment he had dreaded now staring him in the face. He looked into Charlotte's eyes, seeing the concern and love there. He knew he couldn't keep his secret any longer. The guilt was eating him alive, and he realized that true reconciliation could only happen if he was completely honest. Taking a deep breath, he took Charlotte's hands in his. "There is something, Charlotte. Something I've been afraid to tell you because I didn't want to hurt you more than I already have." Charlotte's heart sank, but she nodded, bracing herself. "What is it, Bob? Please, just tell me." Bob's voice trembled as he confessed. "While we were apart, I made a terrible mistake. I was drinking heavily one night, trying to numb the pain, and I ended up with another woman. It meant nothing, and I regret it deeply, but I couldn't keep it from you any longer." Tears welled up in Charlotte's eyes as the words sank in. The pain and betrayal she felt were overwhelming. She pulled her hands away from Bob's, standing up and turning away, unable to look at him. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing down with the weight of his confession. Bob stood as well, desperate to reach out, but unsure if he should. "Charlotte, I'm so sorry. I love you, and I want to make this right. I'll do anything to earn your forgiveness." Charlotte remained silent for a long moment, her back to Bob. She struggled to process the flood of emotions, the hurt and the anger. Finally, she turned to face him, her eyes red and filled with tears. "I need some time, Bob. I need to think about everything. This isn't something I can just move past." Bob nodded, his own eyes glistening with tears. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting, and hoping we can find a way through this." Charlotte nodded and walked to their bedroom, closing the door behind her. She needed space to think, to process what had just happened. The trust that had been rebuilt was shattered once more, and she didn't know if it could ever be restored. Bob sat back down on the couch, his head in his hands. The road to reconciliation had just become infinitely more difficult, and he could only hope that their love would be strong enough to overcome this new obstacle. Chapter 4. The Confession. The tension between Bob and Charlotte had been building again, a simmering undercurrent of unresolved feelings and unspoken grievances. Their attempts at reconciliation had not fully healed the wounds, and the weight of Bob's secret was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. It was during one of these heated arguments, when emotions were raw and tempers flared, that Bob's guilt finally reached a breaking point. The argument began over something trivial, a missed commitment or a forgotten chore, but quickly escalated as old resentments resurfaced. Charlotte's voice was sharp, her frustration spilling over. "You always say you'll change, Bob, but nothing ever changes. I'm still doing everything on my own, and you're still too absorbed in yourself to see how much you're hurting me." Bob's face was flushed, his frustration evident. "And what about you, Charlotte? You're always on my case about everything, and it feels like nothing I do is ever good enough." The room seemed to vibrate with their anger, their voices rising in a cacophony of accusations and hurt. Bob's heart pounded as he struggled to maintain his composure. The guilt of his secret, his betrayal during their separation, was a heavy burden he could no longer keep hidden. In a moment of desperation and exhaustion, Bob blurted out, "You want to know why I've been so distant? I made a huge mistake while we were apart. I cheated on you." The confession hung in the air like a dark cloud, thick with the weight of unspoken pain. Charlotte froze, her eyes widening in shock. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in around her. The words Bob had just uttered seemed surreal, as if they were coming from a place she couldn't quite grasp. "Bob, what are you saying?" Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper, her hands trembling as she clutched at her chest. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. "How could you?" Bob's face was a mask of anguish, his shoulders slumped as he tried to explain. "I'm so sorry, Charlotte. I was drunk, and it didn't mean anything. It was a mistake, an awful, terrible mistake. I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't keep lying to you anymore." Charlotte's tears fell freely now, streaming down her face as she struggled to process the magnitude of Bob's confession. The betrayal felt like a physical blow, a sharp, piercing pain that left her breathless. She could barely see through the tears that blurred her vision, her heart aching with a profound sense of loss. "Why?" Charlotte's voice cracked, the pain evident in every syllable. "Why would you do this to me? I trusted you, Bob. I believed in us." Bob tried to reach out to her, his voice filled with desperation. "Charlotte, please. I know I've hurt you, and I wish I could take it all back. I love you, and I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." But Charlotte could barely hear him. Through the storm of her emotions, she felt as though her world had crumbled beneath her feet, leaving her adrift in a sea of despair. The betrayal was too much to bear, and she struggled to reconcile the man she loved with the man who had caused her such profound pain. Her heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces. She sank to the floor, her sobs shaking her entire body. "I need to be alone," she finally managed to say, her voice a broken whisper. I can't be around you right now." Bob watched helplessly as Charlotte stood and moved away from him, her body language closed off and defeated. He wanted to comfort her, to make things right, but he understood that his actions had irrevocably damaged their relationship. He stayed where he was, feeling a deep, gnawing sense of regret and helplessness. As Charlotte retreated to their bedroom, closing the door behind her, Bob remained in the living room, his mind a turbulent whirl of guilt and sorrow. The space between them felt impossibly wide, the connection they had worked so hard to rebuild now frayed and broken. Bob sank onto the couch, his head in his hands, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. The nights that followed were torturous for both of them. Charlotte found herself unable to eat, the loss of appetite a physical manifestation of her emotional pain. She couldn't sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and shattered trust. Every time she closed her eyes, she was haunted by images of Bob's infidelity and the pain it had caused her. Bob, too, struggled with the aftermath of his confession. He tried to respect Charlotte's need for space, but the silence between them was a constant reminder of the damage he had done. He spent his nights restless and alone, tormented by guilt and the realization that he had jeopardized the love he held dear. Charlotte's world had been turned upside down, and she grappled with the task of trying to make sense of it all. The man she had loved and trusted seemed like a stranger now, and the future of their relationship was uncertain. She needed time to heal, to find a way to cope with the betrayal and decide if there was a path forward for them. The days and nights were filled with emotional turbulence, as both Bob and Charlotte navigated the difficult journey of dealing with the fallout from the confession. The path to reconciliation was now more daunting than ever, fraught with the challenge of rebuilding trust and healing from deep-seated wounds. Part 3. The Plan for Revenge, Chapter 5. Charlotte's turmoil days turned into weeks, and the initial shock of Bob's confession began to evolve into something darker within Charlotte. The numbness that had gripped her in the immediate aftermath of the betrayal started to recede, replaced by a searing, all-consuming anger. This anger gradually crystallized into a burning desire for revenge. She wanted Bob to experience the same pain, the same sense of betrayal that had consumed her. The thought of him feeling even a fraction of what she felt became an obsession. Charlotte found herself plagued by dark thoughts, each one more sinister than the last. She began to fantasize about ways to make Bob suffer, to make him understand the depth of her hurt. Her mind became a battleground of ideas, each more elaborate and cruel than the one before. It was as if her grief had morphed into a hunger for retribution, and every waking moment was consumed by plotting her revenge. She started with subtle changes in her behavior. The warmth and affection she once freely gave to Bob were now replaced by a cold, detached demeanor. When he would try to engage her in conversation, she responded with short, clipped answers, her eyes avoiding his. The warmth in her gaze was gone, replaced by a chilling distance that Bob found increasingly difficult to bridge. Bob, already grappling with his own guilt and remorse, noticed the shift in Charlotte's behavior. He could feel the emotional chasm growing between them, and his attempts to reach out were met with resistance. He tried to be more attentive, to cater to Charlotte's needs, but his gestures of goodwill seemed to fall flat. Each effort to reconnect was met with a lack of enthusiasm, a stark contrast to the eager responses he had once received. Charlotte's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would sometimes burst into tears for no apparent reason, her emotions a volatile mix of anger and sadness. At other times, she would be uncharacteristically quiet, lost in her own thoughts, and completely unresponsive to Bob's attempts at conversation or physical affection. Her unpredictability left Bob confused and on edge, unsure of how to navigate the shifting emotional landscape of their relationship. Bob's confusion deepened as he watched Charlotte slip further away from him. His guilt and self-loathing grew as he tried to understand the reasons behind her sudden change in behavior. He questioned whether he was doing enough to atone for his actions, whether his efforts to make things right were insufficient. His nights were filled with restless sleep, his days marked by an ever-present cloud of anxiety and regret. Charlotte's plotting took on a more tangible form as well. She began to engage in behaviors that she knew would hurt Bob, small acts of defiance and rebellion. She would spend more time away from home, claiming she was working late or visiting friends. But in reality, she was seeking out ways to make Bob's life more difficult. She would make plans without informing him, making him feel increasingly excluded from her life. Her sense of vindication came in small, bitter victories. She relished in making Bob wait for her attention, in holding back affection as a way to punish him for his betrayal. She took solace in the fact that she could control her own emotional responses, even if it meant pushing Bob further away. As Charlotte's emotional distance grew, Bob found himself in a state of perpetual uncertainty. The emotional gap between them widened, and his once firm belief in their ability to repair their relationship started to waver. He sought counsel from friends and family, hoping for guidance on how to mend the rift, but no advice seemed to ease his anguish. Charlotte's internal turmoil became a driving force, shaping her actions and decisions. The desire for revenge began to overshadow her feelings of hurt, creating a cycle of emotional pain that seemed impossible to break. Her once vibrant personality became shadowed by a cold, calculating demeanor, and she took a grim satisfaction in knowing that Bob was suffering, even if he was unable to fully understand why. The house, once a place of warmth and shared joy, became a battleground of silence and unresolved tension. Charlotte's growing anger and desire for retribution cast a long shadow over their home, and the once hopeful efforts at reconciliation seemed increasingly futile. The emotional landscape of their relationship was now dominated by mistrust and pain, with each day bringing new challenges and deepening the divide between them. Chapter 6. Setting the Stage. As the days passed, Charlotte's plan to make Bob feel the sting of betrayal took shape with a meticulous, calculated precision. She knew that the most effective way to make Bob experience jealousy and pain was to manipulate his emotions through someone from her past. Thus, she reconnected with an old friend, David. David was a charismatic and successful lawyer, known for his sharp intellect and charm. He had always carried a torch for Charlotte, his feelings for her lingering even though they had lost touch over the years. Charlotte knew that David's presence would serve as the perfect tool in her scheme. His undeniable attractiveness and past affection for her made him an ideal candidate to stir up Bob's emotions. Charlotte began by creating opportunities for Bob to discover her relationship with David. She left her phone unlocked and in plain view, knowing that Bob's curiosity would lead him to browse through her messages. She made sure that the conversations between her and David were explicit enough to convey the nature of their relationship without leaving too much concrete evidence. Messages like, "Can't wait to see you tonight," and "Last night was incredible," were intentionally left open, strategically placed for Bob to stumble upon. In addition to these digital clues, Charlotte ensured that Bob would overhear phone calls that hinted at more than just a casual friendship. During conversations with David, she allowed her voice to take on a tone of intimacy, using pet names and references to private moments. Bob, already on edge, was left with no doubt about the nature of their interactions. The calls were often conducted in a manner that made it impossible for Bob to miss the undercurrent of flirtation and affection. Despite her efforts to keep Bob informed of her unfaithfulness through indirect means, the affair itself was carefully concealed. Charlotte and David met frequently in locations that were relatively discreet, but still left room for Bob to discover. The meetings were planned with the precision of a chess game, ensuring that the moments when Bob might find out were as dramatic as possible. The breaking point came one evening when Charlotte and David had arranged to meet at a high-end hotel. Charlotte, fully aware that Bob would be watching, made sure to dress in an outfit that exuded allure and confidence. Her choice of clothing and demeanor were meant to leave a lasting impression on Bob, amplifying the impact of his discovery. Bob had become increasingly suspicious and anxious, his jealousy consuming him. On that particular evening, he decided to follow Charlotte, driven by a need to uncover the truth. He trailed her from their home, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. When Charlotte's car pulled up to the hotel, Bob's worst fears were confirmed. He watched from a distance as she entered the hotel lobby, her hand clasped tightly with David's, her body language unmistakably intimate. Bob's breath caught in his throat as he saw Charlotte and David make their way to the elevator. The sight of his wife with another man was like a physical blow, shattering him. The emotional weight of the betrayal hit him hard, leaving him paralyzed for a moment before he mustered the strength to confront them. Unable to bear the pain any longer, Bob followed them into the hotel, his steps heavy with the burden of his anguish. He waited for them to emerge from the elevator and headed towards the room where he knew they would be. The hotel corridors felt like a maze of torment, each step echoing his internal turmoil. When Bob finally reached the door of the hotel room, he hesitated for a moment, steeling himself for the confrontation. He knocked loudly, the sound reverberating through the corridor. When Charlotte answered the door, her expression shifted from surprise to cold detachment as she took in the sight of Bob standing before her. "Bob, what are you doing here?" Charlotte asked, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. Bob's pain and rage boiled over, unable to be contained any longer. "Why, Charlotte? Why are you doing this?" he demanded, his voice breaking under the weight of his emotions. Charlotte's face was a mask of hard resolve, her eyes devoid of the warmth they once held. "Now you know how it feels, Bob. Now you know what it's like to be betrayed by the person you love," she replied coldly, her words slicing through the air like a blade. Bob's world crumbled as the reality of Charlotte's betrayal hit him full force. The confrontation was raw and painful, an emotional battlefield where his hurt was laid bare. Charlotte stood firm, her eyes reflecting a mixture of satisfaction and bitterness as she watched Bob grapple with the depth of his own pain. The confrontation was a stark reversal of their previous roles. Bob, who had once been the source of Charlotte's anguish, was now on the receiving end of the emotional torment. The affair with David had been Charlotte's ultimate weapon, a means of inflicting the same kind of hurt that she had experienced. The hotel room, which had been the setting for moments of intimacy and affection between Charlotte and David, now became a stage for confrontation and raw emotion. The walls seemed to close in on Bob as he faced the reality of his own betrayal being mirrored back at him. The experience was both a devastating blow and a twisted form of justice, as Charlotte's actions left an indelible mark on their relationship and their lives. Chapter 8. Bob's Despair. The hotel room door closed behind Bob with a resounding thud, and he was left standing in the corridor, reeling from the confrontation. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and despair. The image of Charlotte and David together was burned into his memory, replaying over and over as he staggered back to his car. Each step felt like a crushing blow, each breath a painful reminder of his shattered reality. Bob's devastation was profound. The weight of Charlotte's revenge hit him like a tidal wave, and he was left grappling with the full impact of her actions. The guilt and regret that had been simmering beneath the surface now erupted in a torrent of emotional agony. The knowledge that his own betrayal had been met with such a calculated response left him feeling hollow and overwhelmed. Returning home, Bob found it nearly impossible to function. The house, once a symbol of comfort and stability, now felt like a prison of memories and unfulfilled promises. He tried to go through the motions of daily life, eating, sleeping, and working, but each task was a struggle. His mind was consumed with the details of the betrayal, the pain of seeing Charlotte with someone else, and the relentless self-blame that followed. Bob decided to take time off work, his ability to concentrate eroded by the crushing weight of his emotions. He couldn't focus on tasks that once seemed routine and simple. Meetings, deadlines, and financial reports were now distant concerns, overshadowed by the tumultuous storm within his mind. The sense of professional failure only compounded his feelings of inadequacy and despair. In an attempt to numb the pain, Bob turned to alcohol once again. He found solace in the temporary escape it offered, drowning his sorrows in a haze of whiskey and wine. The bottles, once symbols of his previous escapism, now became his crutch in a desperate bid to avoid confronting the depth of his suffering. His drinking became more frequent and excessive, a means of escaping the relentless ache of his emotional wounds. Charlotte watched from a distance as Bob unraveled, her emotions a complex blend of satisfaction and growing emptiness. The initial thrill of seeing Bob suffer, of knowing she had inflicted the same kind of pain she had felt, was palpable. It was a twisted form of justice that brought a fleeting sense of vindication. For a while, Charlotte reveled in her power, seeing Bob's anguish as a form of poetic retribution. However, as the days turned into weeks, the satisfaction began to erode. The once clear lines between revenge and love blurred, and Charlotte found herself facing an uncomfortable truth. The joy she had anticipated from Bob's suffering was overshadowed by a deep sense of emptiness. The realization dawned on her that her quest for vengeance had come at a steep price, one that included the love she had once cherished and the future she had envisioned with Bob. Charlotte's feelings of satisfaction gave way to a profound sense of loss. She observed Bob's descent into despair with a growing sense of regret. The man she had once loved, the partner she had shared so much of her life with, was now a shell of his former self. The sight of his pain and the knowledge that she had been the architect of it left her grappling with her own feelings of guilt. The home that had once been filled with shared moments and mutual support now felt like a battleground scarred by emotional warfare. The walls seemed to echo with the ghosts of their happier times, and the house, once a symbol of their union, became a stark reminder of what had been lost. Charlotte began to question the value of her revenge. The satisfaction of having Bob experience betrayal was increasingly overshadowed by the realization of the emotional toll it had taken on both of them. The love she had once cherished, the life they had built together, had been sacrificed on the altar of vengeance. The emptiness she felt grew more pronounced, a void that no amount of retribution could fill. In her solitude, Charlotte reflected on the choices she had made and their consequences. The clarity of her actions and their impact on Bob became a source of profound introspection. She questioned whether the pain she had inflicted was worth the cost of losing the love she had once held dear. The journey from anger to regret was a painful one, and the path forward seemed uncertain and fraught with emotional complexity. The house, once a sanctuary, now stood as a testament to their fractured relationship. Charlotte and Bob were trapped in a cycle of mutual suffering, each grappling with the consequences of their actions. The future, once filled with hope and promise, was now shrouded in ambiguity. As Charlotte confronted the fallout of her revenge, she faced the sobering reality of a love irrevocably altered and a life forever changed by the pursuit of vengeance. Part 5. Consequences and Reflection. Chapter 9. The Fallout. The affair with David, once a calculated means of revenge, had fizzled out, leaving Charlotte feeling emptier than ever. The initial excitement of her secret trysts with David had worn off, and she found herself confronting the stark reality of her own choices. The thrill of revenge had dissipated, leaving behind a profound sense of hollowness and loneliness. The emotional connection she had sought through the affair proved to be a fleeting illusion, and now she faced the aftermath of her actions with a heavy heart. The house, once a symbol of comfort and shared dreams, had become a stark reminder of their fractured relationship. Its walls seemed to close in on Charlotte, echoing with the memories of better times now lost. The familiar spaces that had once held warmth and love now felt cold and unwelcoming. The living room, where they had shared countless conversations, the kitchen, where they had cooked meals together, each room was a poignant reminder of the life they had built and the ruin they had wrought. Bob, too, was a shadow of the man he had once been. The pain of the betrayal, compounded by the aftermath of Charlotte's revenge, had left him a broken man. His initial attempts to mask his suffering with alcohol had only deepened his despair. His physical appearance had deteriorated. He was gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes and a demeanor that spoke of sleepless nights and relentless internal turmoil. The once confident financial analyst was now struggling to find his footing, his professional and personal lives in tatters. Both Charlotte and Bob were now faced with the stark reality of their actions. They could no longer avoid the fallout of their decisions and were compelled to confront the wreckage of their marriage. In a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of their relationship, they decided to seek marriage counseling. The choice to attend therapy was born out of a mutual, though reluctant, recognition that they needed external help to navigate the complex emotions and issues they were facing. The counseling sessions, however, proved to be a battleground of anger and resentment. The therapist's office, with its neutral tones and comforting decor, was a stark contrast to the turmoil that unfolded during each session. Charlotte and Bob arrived with their own baggage, their faces etched with the strain of their ongoing conflict. The therapist's attempts to guide them through their pain often seemed to amplify their emotions rather than alleviate them. Each session began with a tentative attempt to address the surface-level issues, the household responsibilities, the emotional distance, and the lack of communication. But as the sessions progressed, deeper layers of hurt were unearthed. The raw wounds of betrayal were laid bare, and each session seemed to peel back another layer of their emotional scars. Bob's guilt and Charlotte's sense of betrayal were dissected, revealing the depth of their respective pain and the complexity of their feelings. Charlotte often struggled to contain her anger during these sessions. The counselor's probing questions and attempts to facilitate communication seemed to only reignite her feelings of injustice. She felt that the therapy sessions were forcing her to relive the agony of the affair and the subsequent revenge. Her anger at Bob, coupled with her regret over her own actions, created a volatile mix of emotions that made constructive dialogue nearly impossible. Bob, on the other hand, was frequently overwhelmed by guilt and shame. He wanted to make amends, but struggled to express his remorse in a way that resonated with Charlotte. His attempts to communicate his regret often fell flat, resulting in further frustration. The sessions became a platform for him to express his sorrow and his desire to make things right. But the depth of his emotional pain often overshadowed his attempts at reconciliation. As the weeks went by, the therapy sessions revealed the enormity of the task before them. Rebuilding their shattered relationship seemed like an insurmountable challenge. The trust that had been so meticulously eroded was difficult to restore, and the emotional distance that had grown between them was not easily bridged. Both Charlotte and Bob were grappling with their own personal demons while attempting to mend the fractured bond between them. The sense of hope that initially accompanied their decision to seek therapy gradually faded as they faced the relentless reality of their situation. Each session seemed to reinforce the enormity of the emotional damage they had inflicted on one another. The therapist's insights and strategies, though well-intentioned, felt inadequate in the face of the deep-seated issues they were confronting. The sessions also served as a mirror, reflecting the changes that had taken place in their relationship. The love that once seemed so strong and enduring was now obscured by layers of hurt and mistrust. The shared moments that had once bound them together now felt distant and unattainable. The task of rebuilding what they had destroyed seemed both daunting and elusive. As the counseling continued, Charlotte and Bob found themselves at a crossroads. They had to decide whether they were willing to continue the arduous process of reconciliation or whether they would accept the reality of their situation and part ways. The choice was not clear-cut. Both were deeply invested in the idea of salvaging their relationship, but were also acutely aware of the damage that had been done. The journey through therapy was fraught with emotional turbulence, leaving Charlotte and Bob grappling with the realization that healing their relationship would require more than just attending sessions. It demanded a profound shift in their understanding of one another, a willingness to forgive and rebuild, and an acceptance of the changes that had occurred. The fallout from their actions had left them both battered and bruised, and the path forward was obscured by the lingering shadows of their shared pain. Chapter 10. Personal Growth. As time passed, both Charlotte and Bob found themselves at a crucial juncture. The intense emotions of their recent past began to settle, leaving them with a sobering realization. Their marriage had been deteriorating long before the incidents of infidelity and revenge. The cracks in their relationship had been forming slowly, often unnoticed or ignored until they had grown too large to repair without significant effort. This insight was both a painful acknowledgement and a catalyst for change. Charlotte's journey. For Charlotte, personal growth became a journey of rediscovering her identity and passions. The destruction of her marriage had left her feeling adrift, but she began to see it as an opportunity to reconnect with the parts of herself that had been neglected. Her bookstore, once a source of pride and joy, became a refuge and a place of renewal. Charlotte poured herself into her work with renewed vigor. She reorganized the bookstore, creating cozy reading nooks and hosting author events that revitalized the space. The bookstore became a vibrant community hub, and Charlotte found herself invigorated by the connections she made with customers and fellow book lovers. This professional reinvention allowed her to rebuild her sense of purpose and self-worth outside the confines of her troubled marriage. In addition to her work, Charlotte launched a book club that quickly gained popularity. The book club became a weekly ritual, providing her with a structured social outlet and a platform to engage with like-minded individuals. The discussions, camaraderie, and shared love of literature offered Charlotte a profound sense of belonging and fulfillment. The book club meetings were not just about books, but also about forging new friendships and reconnecting with her own interests and passions. Charlotte also sought therapy to work through her emotional pain and to understand the patterns in her past relationships. The therapy sessions were challenging, but ultimately rewarding. She explored her own role in the breakdown of her marriage and learned to set healthier boundaries in her personal and professional life. The process of self-reflection and growth helped her to gain a clearer perspective on her needs and desires. Bob's journey. Bob's path to personal growth was equally transformative, but took a different direction. His struggle with alcohol and the resulting fallout had left him at rock bottom, but it also became the impetus for significant change. He recognized that addressing his addiction was essential not only for his well-being, but also for any chance of healing the fractured remnants of his life. Bob joined a support group for alcoholics, a decision that marked a pivotal step in confronting his issues. The support group provided him with a structured environment to share his experiences and hear the stories of others who had faced similar struggles. The camaraderie and understanding he found in the group helped him feel less isolated and more hopeful about his ability to overcome his addiction. Alongside his participation in the support group, Bob took up running as a means of channeling his energy and emotions into something positive. The physical exertion of running became a form of therapy, helping him to manage stress and improve his mental health. He found solace in the rhythmic pounding of his feet on the pavement and the sense of accomplishment that came with each completed run. Running also offered him time for introspection, allowing him to process his thoughts and emotions in a productive way. Bob's journey also included individual therapy, where he worked through his guilt, shame, and the underlying issues that contributed to his alcoholism. He addressed the patterns of behavior that had affected his relationship with Charlotte and sought to understand himself better. The therapy sessions were challenging, but provided him with valuable tools for personal development and emotional regulation. The impact of their growth. As Charlotte and Bob focused on their personal growth, they began to see the positive effects on their individual lives. The efforts they made to improve themselves started to create a ripple effect, impacting their perspectives on their relationship and their interactions with each other. Charlotte's newfound sense of purpose and community brought her a renewed sense of confidence and fulfillment. She approached her life with a fresh outlook, informed by her experiences and the insights gained from her personal growth. Her interactions with Bob became less charged with anger and more reflective of her own healing journey. Bob similarly found that his efforts to address his addiction and improve his mental health led to a greater sense of self-respect and stability. His commitment to personal growth allowed him to confront his past mistakes with honesty and strive for a healthier future. While the road to reconciliation was still fraught with challenges, the personal growth that Charlotte and Bob experienced laid the foundation for a more hopeful future. They began to approach their interactions with a greater sense of empathy and understanding, having gained valuable insights into themselves and each other. Their individual journeys of growth and healing were not quick fixes, but they provided a pathway toward rebuilding their lives, both together and apart. Charlotte and Bob's commitment to personal development marked a significant step in their journey, whether it led them to eventually rekindle their relationship or to pursue separate paths with a greater sense of self-awareness and peace. Part 6. Resolution, Chapter 11. The Decision. After months of introspection and healing, Charlotte and Bob found themselves at a crossroads. Their individual journeys of self-discovery and growth had brought them to this moment, a crucial discussion about the future of their relationship. The emotional weight of their past mistakes loomed large, but they were determined to confront it with honesty and openness. They met in a neutral setting, a quiet cafe with soft lighting and a calming atmosphere. The choice of location reflected their desire to approach this conversation with a sense of calm and sincerity. As they sat across from each other, there was a palpable tension in the air, a mixture of hope and apprehension. Bob was the first to speak, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm sorry, Charlotte. I failed you, and I failed us," he said, tears welling in his eyes. The words were heavy with the weight of his guilt and regret, a stark acknowledgement of his mistakes and the hurt they had caused. His hands trembled slightly as he looked down at them, struggling to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. Charlotte's eyes softened as she listened to Bob's apology. The pain she had carried for so long was mirrored in Bob's sorrow, and she felt a pang of empathy mixed with her own lingering hurt. "And I'm sorry too, Bob," she said, her voice trembling. "I let my pain turn into something ugly. We both need to be better." Her words were a mixture of regret and resolution, a recognition of her own role in their troubled past, and a desire to move forward with integrity. The conversation continued with both of them, expressing their feelings openly. They acknowledged the ways in which they had each contributed to the breakdown of their marriage and the impact of their actions on one another. There were tears and moments of silence, as well as heartfelt apologies and expressions of longing for a better future. After hours of intense conversation, they reached a pivotal decision. They agreed to give their marriage one last chance, understanding that it would require a significant effort from both sides. This time, they committed to building their relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. They knew that repairing what had been broken would be a long and arduous process, but they were willing to try. Chapter 12. Rebuilding Trust. The process of rebuilding trust was arduous and slow. Charlotte and Bob embarked on a path of couples therapy, seeking to address the deep-seated issues that had undermined their relationship. The therapy sessions were challenging, but crucial, as they provided a structured environment to work through their issues with the guidance of a professional. During these sessions, Charlotte and Bob learned to communicate more effectively. They practiced active listening, ensuring that each person's thoughts and feelings were heard and understood. The therapist guided them in expressing their needs and fears in a constructive manner, which helped to reduce misunderstandings and build empathy. Setting boundaries became an essential part of their recovery process. They discussed and agreed upon clear guidelines to prevent the recurrence of harmful behaviors. These boundaries included regular check-ins to discuss their emotional well-being, as well as commitments to transparency in their interactions with each other. The pact to be completely honest with each other was a significant step toward rebuilding their trust. They made a commitment to share their thoughts and feelings openly, even when it was difficult. This honesty required vulnerability and courage, but it was a crucial element in restoring the faith that had been shattered. As they worked through their therapy and personal growth, Charlotte and Bob rediscovered the love that had initially brought them together. They began to appreciate the small moments that they had once taken for granted. Cooking dinner together became a cherished ritual, as they enjoyed the process of preparing meals and sharing the experience. Taking walks in the park became a symbol of their renewed connection, providing them with a sense of peace and companionship. Gradually, the wounds of their past began to heal. The bond between them grew stronger as they navigated the challenges together. The process of rebuilding trust was not without setbacks, but the effort they put into their relationship began to pay off. They learned to appreciate each other's efforts and to celebrate the progress they made. Chapter 13. A New Beginning. Years later, Charlotte and Bob stood hand in hand, gazing out at the life they had rebuilt together. The journey they had undertaken had been marked by betrayal, pain, and numerous challenges, but it had also been a path of rediscovery and growth. They had learned that love was not just about the happy moments, but also about weathering the storms together. Their shared experiences had strengthened their bond and deepened their understanding of each other. The trials they had faced had tested their commitment, but they emerged from the ordeal with a renewed appreciation for their relationship. Charlotte and Bob's new beginning was characterized by a sense of mutual respect and understanding. They had rebuilt their relationship on a solid foundation, one that was grounded in honesty and shared values. The love they had once known had evolved into a more profound and enduring connection. As they looked toward the future, Charlotte and Bob felt a sense of hope and optimism. They had overcome significant obstacles and had come to appreciate the resilience of their love. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had ultimately led them to a place of greater harmony and fulfillment. Epilogue. Charlotte and Bob's story serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of forgiveness. Their journey through infidelity and revenge had tested them in ways they had never imagined, but it also led them to a deeper understanding of themselves and each other. Their story is one of redemption and growth, illustrating that even in the face of profound adversity, it is possible to find healing and renewal. Charlotte and Bob emerged from their ordeal, not just as a couple, but as two individuals who had navigated the darkest of times and found their way back to each other. Their journey stands as a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the enduring capacity for love and forgiveness.